Hello and welcome to Screen Fever. My name is Adam Barnard, and I'm joined today by Robert Yaniz Jr. for a special discussion on a breaking news about a Boba Fett spinoff. Before we get into the main discussion, I just want to say a little bit about Robert. He is a contributing writer at Screen Rant and Monkeys Fighting Robots, which is a local publication to Florida. Is that right?
Yeah, the site is locally based, but we have writers all over the place, and yeah, is covering a lot of focus on all the geek properties that we love to discuss, especially a lot of Star Wars stuff these days. So, but I mean that's kind of par for the course in this industry right now, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also host your own podcast called The Crooked Table, right?
I do Crooked Table podcast, and I have reviews and some videos. I need to up the content in that department over at crookedtable.com. We're also on Patreon if people want to check us out there.
Cool. So I've actually known you for a little while, but we haven't met in person or we haven't done any of this before.
No, no.
Robert and I met through a mutual friend who also works in publication and journalism. And so we've kind of been Facebook buddies and thrown back messages and commented on each other's statuses about movies. But this is exciting. We actually get to talk about news now, about more Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a perfect occasion to finally connect.
Never gonna pass up a conversation about Star Wars for me. Like that's just
Yeah, same
so
here.
quintessential to geek fandom. So just a day or two ago, the Hollywood Reporter broke the news that writer and director James Mangold is slated to co-write and helm a Boba Fett spin-off movie. Not too much in terms of release date. It's kind of unclear whether the Kenobi movie or the Boba Fett movie will come first. This movie was originally the movie that was supposed to be directed by Josh Trank before he got fired many, many years ago. I believe it was scheduled to be in the 2018 slot, and the only reason we got Solo first was because this movie had a big change up and kind of went into development hell. So, Robert, what do you think of the news, and how do you feel about this pairing?
Well, I mean, since the beginning of the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilm, and news that we were getting all these spin-offs, I know Boba Fett has been one that has sort of been rumored for a long time, and I've kind of been on the fence about whether or not that character is the right fit for something like this. But having someone like James Mangold, who already did such a great job with Logan last year, I think he can really root this and turn Boba Fett into sort of an anti-hero and kind of apply his spaghetti western style to the Star Wars universe, and I think that would be kind of a take on the franchise that we haven't really seen yet.
I think his resume speaks for itself. I mean, like you said, he has a real distinct style and history. He did the Johnny Cash biopic Walk the Line. He did 310 to Yuma, Night and Day, The Wolverine, and then most recently Logan, which was really just a fantastic take on what would have otherwise been a pretty run-of-the-mill blockbuster story. I mean, I think he really elevated that character and gave him such a brilliant send-off. I think I'm with you where when the spin-off announcements first came out, Boba Fett wasn't one that caught my eye. I know it did for a lot of people, but it just felt like he's kind of like the Captain Phasma of the original trilogy. Like he's there.
Absolutely.
He has a cool design. He says a few lines, but there's not really that much going on with him. I mean, the prequels did more for him than the original trilogy. I think I can see this working if it's rooted in the crime underworld of Star Wars and isn't just laser focused on Boba Fett. Like we had Solo, which is rightfully laser focused on Han Solo, but I can't see Boba Fett just completely carrying his own movie. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. He does feel like like a character that feels like he would show up in someone else's spinoff, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Or show up in a film set during the original trilogy era, like a Rogue One or something like that, and play an integral role there. But we already know where he comes from, and I don't know. It doesn't feel like like you said, there doesn't feel like there's that much depth to really expand on.
Did you ever see the Clone Wars series on the animated one?
I did see that. Yeah.
Yeah, that had a great representation of the crime underworld and smugglers and the fringes of the Star Wars universe. And obviously, we wouldn't get a Boba Fett film in that era because I don't think Boba Fett was just a kid at that point.
Hmm.
I'd I actually thought he was. I mean, okay, sorry, spoilers here, mild spoilers for Solo, but I actually thought he was going to show up in Solo. Like you said, it makes
So did
sense
I.
that he would show up in someone else's film. It would make sense. Um, I still think there's a certain passion that Lucasfilm has for this character, so it seems like this is something that they still really want to get done.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I mean, I heard a lot about a high-profile cameo in Solo, which we won't spoil, but I did kind of assume that it was going to be Boba Fett showing up there. And we could talk about a little later if you want to touch on who that actually turned out to be and whether we want to see more about that. But it does feel that Solo uh, does already give us a little bit of an entrance into that underworld aspects of the universe. And I could even see kind of Boba Fett almost serving as a quasi sequel to Solo and having, some of the cast members from that film kind of carry over into this one, just like the focus sort of shifts.
Sure, absolutely. And let's go ahead and get into that. And again, spoiler warning here, we're going to start to talk a bit more about Solo and who showed up in the movie and how it relates to this Boba Fett news. So, fair warning, you have been warned. Um, if you've seen Solo, you know that the ending very much doesn't feel like an ending for these characters or even for the story. It has some finality of the characters that are introduced, like with Beckett or Dryden Voss, but the end is very much like Kira sailing into the sunset to go see Darth Maul and Solo having just learned his lessons and just met Lando and just got the Falcon. It doesn't feel neatly wrapped like a bow and like we're gonna just move on to the next prequel story or the next sequel in the far-flung future. I wonder if part of the drive behind getting this project done is the fact that maybe Solo characters will show up in a Boba Fett film, and that's why they want to get it out 2 years from now.
Yeah, it almost feels like if this was a Marvel film, there would have been a tag after the credits: Han Solo will return in X, insert film here. And whether they want to have them show up in a Solo sequel or a Boba Fett film or a Lando film, that's a lot of people are sort of talking about. I know Kathleen Kennedy has said that that's something that they're at least considering.
Yeah,
I think that in a way that might be a stronger approach to taking with Alden Ehrenreich's take on this character, rather than doing just a straight sequel from this film. Just kind of pivot around and let other characters have the spotlight.
certainly. So let me ask, when they first announced they were doing anthology films or whatever we want to call them, the Solo films, apart from the trilogy movies, what ideas piqued your interest, and did you have any ideas that you didn't see mentioned in any of the potential candidates for a Solo film?
Well, I think the real opportunity with the Star Wars stories is to fill in the gaps of the saga, because I mean, of the main films, there's most of them have pretty significant time gaps, and there's a lot of stories there that a lot of opportunities to expand on the narrative. And I think that one of the key ones is one of the ones that's been talked about a lot, which is the Obi-Wan spinoff. And I think,
Yeah.
he's hanging out on Tatooine for roughly almost 20 years, and I think there's an opportunity there. And there's a sort of rumored synopsis of what that storyline would be and what Stephen Daldry is going to be doing with that, even though there's not currently a script just yet. I think I think fans have been wanting to know what that character was up to all that time, and I think it would give Ewan McGregor a chance to return to the role in another director's hands. And there's a lot of, basically, my issue with Solo is that they answer a bunch of questions that we didn't really need the answers to. They tell us how he got his name, which I don't even think anybody even really considered that as an option. And
Sure.
they show us a lot of stuff that we already knew happened. He gets the Millennium Falcon, he meets Chewbacca, the Kessel Run and all that, which is fine, but it's more like just checking off boxes in his backstory that has already been pre-established, rather than adding new wrinkles and making that the focus of his story. So that's why I like to see things sort of going further back in time and There's a lot of fans have been talking about wanting a Knights of the Old Republic film, or and involve, or I think there was like that Seven Samurai style Jedi premise that was being tossed around at one point, possibly with Yoda included in there. Um, I think there's a lot of opportunities to expand into different eras and to characters that we don't really know much about. And perhaps Boba Fett is one of those. Had he not been included in the prequels, I think there would be even more for James Mangold to work with, just
Sure.
because he'd have more of a clean slate.
Yeah.
But like someone like Lando, who shows up in Cloud City, and we really don't know much about him except, oh, Han is friends with this guy and lost the Falcon in him, and he's working at Cloud City now. I think that there's a lot of things they could expand upon. Honestly, after seeing Solo, I kind of want to see what Maul has been up to. And I know that's been covered in some of the animated series, but it was really cool to see Ray Park show up in character again.
Yeah, I think that I've seen so many funny reports about people being baffled in the theaters who either just had no idea about the canon in the animated shows that Darth Maul is a big part of it and he lived, or they just didn't. They were like, "This is wrong. Why? How is this possible? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Who is that?"
There was a Vanity Fair did a whole story about that. That was like, I remember seeing things on Twitter just a couple of days ago, people being like, if you Google anything Star Wars, be careful for Solo spoilers, because it was like one of the first things that came up. How is Darth Maul alive in Solo Star Wars story?
Right, and it's kind of a sweet victory for me because I've been such an advocate for the animated shows, and almost everyone I talk to is like, yeah, it doesn't seem that necessary. Like, okay, I'll check it out, and they never do. But there's
Right.
such good shows, like really on their own. It's not just because it's Star Wars; they're just very well made. I'm excited to see the bridge between what is kind of the bastard stepchild of Star Wars canon be finally linked to the live action movies. I think that's going to create a lot. And I mean, sorry, Rogue One did this with Saw Gerrera.
That's
Saw
true.
Gerrera had like a 6 episode arc somewhere in the Clone Wars series. So they've already started to bridge the two worlds together, which is going to provide a lot of opportunities for like a Boba Fett film or for a Kenobi film, because we're going to be able to reliably tap into the lore that has been on the fringes so far.
And I was gonna say, and I think that's part of why that Maul appearance was so like uh so welcome from on my side of things too, is but
Sure.
the main saga is kind of its own thing, and obviously those are their big money makers, and that's that they get sort of the brunt of the spotlight for the franchise. So the anthology films are really an opportunity to sneak things like that in, and Saw Gerrera was a baby step, basically. Probably with them just sort of testing it out so that they can put a character from the films who's been expanded on in the animated series back in such an audacious way. And I think that could be, maybe Lucasfilm leading up to an Ahsoka Tano film, which I think a lot of fans want to see too.
That's another character that's gonna be good for Star Wars's evolution with the spin-off
Hmm.
films. Without being rude to Lucasfilm or Kathy Kennedy, most of the story choices have been safe so far. I
Hmm.
mean, if you look at the movies, like Force Awakens is very much a spiritual retelling of A New Hope, and
Yeah,
I will
absolutely.
say Last Jedi is probably the outlier of the most different. But like, look, Rogue One is stealing the Death Star plans. That's mentioned in the crawl of A New Hope. Han Solo is one of the most titular characters of the franchise, so it's like you can't really go wrong in terms of name recognition or marketing with a young Han Solo film. Whether or not we intellectually needed it, it's very much a marketable adventure, or so we thought. Something with Yoda or Knights of the Old Republic, or anything that was hyper stylized, like a Knights of Ren movie, either have been like, okay, let's just shoo it off to the side. Like, let's not do something that's super risky and daring. And that's been a bit of a disappointment. I think when I expected Star Wars to come back, even with The Force Awakens, I was expecting a natural evolution, not going back and kind of gleefully admiring all the greatest parts of A New Hope. I wanted
Right.
something that was going to, like the prequels did, push forward the mythology of Star Wars without using the original trio as a storytelling crutch. So that's. I still have a tinge of disappointment about the trilogy films, which is why I found myself gravitating towards the spin offs and the TV shows and putting more hope ironically, in those to carry the greater Star Wars mythos forward. In terms of the Obi-Wan film, Stephen Daldry was announced or leaked as being involved like a year ago, and I pulled up the article. It was in August of 2017. It's kind of surprising that the most recent Hollywood Reporter article said there isn't a script, because it seems like it's had a director attached or in negotiations for almost a year. So it's kind of weird for me that Boba Fett film, which has been had no info on since for a while now, since like Trank was fired 3 years ago, now all of a sudden that jumps ahead of an Obi-Wan film. I don't know how I feel about that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be that they're just not sure 100% what direction to go with the Obi-Wan film. I
Yeah.
mean, for my money, if they don't get Ewan McGregor back, I'd rather just not even bother with it, you
Same
know?
here. Absolute 100%. He's the perfect age. I mean, he's literally
He is.
aged like 10 years or 12 years since Revenge of the Sith. So you're smack dab in the middle between what we saw in Revenge of the Sith and what we saw with Alec Guinness in A New Hope. I mean, I'm at the point where if you wait too much longer, I don't want him to look as old as Alec Guinness when he's doing a Kenobi movie. Like, I
Right.
want something where a character has been in total isolation for 20 years, and what is his life like? How has he changed? You know, where is that? To me almost feels more necessary, because like there's so much resting on the shoulders of Kenobi as a, yeah, signature character in the Star Wars lore. I've wanted that film for so long now.
And it's interesting, I think, right now because we're very much in like in an era that's very akin to the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase One, where Lucasfilm is sort of trying to figure out, all right, well, how do we strike the balance between bringing something new and playing the nostalgia card? Because with The Last Jedi, some people like myself really love it, but a lot of people really have beef with that movie, obviously. And so, but Solo just leans so far in the other direction. It's like franchise whiplash going from The Last Jedi to Solo. So it could be with Obi-Wan that they're trying to figure out, all right, well, what could we do to kind of split the difference there and have bring enough to the franchise, to the big screen side of it at least, that
Yeah.
that hardcore, that casual moviegoers aren't familiar with, and how do we basically please everybody across the board? I think that's probably what they're trying to figure out with Obi-Wan. And maybe they see Boba Fett as just a natural extension of the Solo corner of the universe, which makes perfect sense.
Again, even if we don't get a direct sequel to Solo, that film is so open ended. I don't know if I'm surprised more people aren't talking about it, because while it was a fun adventure, I was like, no, that's not the end. Like, I'm not finished with Han and Kira or any of the story arcs. I just felt like I needed more. I need at least one
Mm-hmm.
more or something more. I want to get your take on what you think about the direction of the spin-off films and how it has to evolve to continue being fresh. I know I'm a guy who's leaning towards the spin-offs, like I said, and you're a guy who's leaning toward Force Awakens and Last Jedi. So what is your take on the spin-off movies, and what do you want to see going forward?
Right. I want to see characters that I want to, like I said, I want to see narrative gaps filled in. So we have that big gap between episode 3 and episode 4. What was Obi-Wan doing during that period?
Yeah.
What was happening before episode 1? What was happening between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, whether it's a Knights of Ren movie or whatever. I don't think it's a good idea for them just be like, all right, fans like this person, let's see young Han Solo, young Princess Leia, young Chewbacca, I don't want them to slip into that, because I know a
Yeah.
lot of people are saying, oh, Millie Bobby Brown would be perfect as a young Leia. I don't really know if I want to see that. I don't know if that's the right approach, to just be like, all right, where's the list of the most popular Star Wars characters? Let's see all of them as children now, and just kind of build up to what they were all doing and like parallel tracks that led them to A New Hope. I think that's going to play out pretty fast.
I hadn't even heard anything about Millie Bobby Brown with a Leia. I mean, obviously, it's more fan speculation, but like,
Right, it is.
Carrie Fisher was 19 years old when
Mm-hmm.
she did Star Wars. Like, do we really need to go any younger than 19? I mean, to that point, Han Solo in this film is 19. They're not going back to like 12-year-old Han Solo. And I think Star Wars is still in a state of panic, or not panic, but fear of bringing iconic characters back to their youth, because it didn't go so well with the Phantom Menace. That's one of like the biggest black marks for a lot of fandom on the franchise. So the idea of taking Leia and making her a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old is kind of like, it's a really risky proposition. And like you said, it's not entirely necessary. I don't understand the lack of desire to go do a distant prequel. Like, we have been teased so heavily about the mythos of the Jedi as an ancient religion, as something that was
text.
Every film links back to this ideal or this rich history or this it's kind of like what we have with like the Knights or the Templar or the Crusades. Like, it's this ancient myth that we know about, but we have no tangible connection. We don't even know. There's conflicting sources. There's an ideology that's kind of corrupt about it, but also really intriguing. It's like, I know we have a Knights of the Old Republic game, but why don't we have a Jedi Knight movie? Because even in Last Jedi, like, Last Jedi evolved how we view the Jedi and the Force, and it's a perfect time to contrast Luke Skywalker's elderly opinion of the Jedi with actually seeing the Jedi in action in their prime.
Which is why part of me hopes, even though I think there's been some reports to the contrary, that is the direction that Rian Johnson takes it with his trilogy that he's working on.
I really hope so.
It's I just think focusing more on story and less on individual fan favorite characters, I think, is what they need to do, because especially, as you said, these characters are so iconic. Looking for an actor to play to recapture that every single time, it's really challenging. And look at Alden Ehrenreich and all the like scrutiny that he's gotten stepping into Harrison Ford's shoes. I just think they need to step back from telling the life stories of individual characters. And maybe they got away with it with Solo because it naturally sort of reins in Chewbacca, Lando, Maul, that's unbeknownst to everyone. And it kind of lends itself to further expansion. But I think if they keep doing the same trick more than once or twice, I think that fans are going to get tired of it, and franchise fatigue is definitely going to start setting in.
Yeah, and we had a really crowded blockbuster season. That was something that I was concerned about from the start, because I have a lot of movies I care about that are packed within a week or two of each other. And just, from a pure financial standpoint, if you debut Deadpool, its second weekend is still going to bring in a pretty big haul. If you debut a similar action film that's going to target similar demographics 5 or 7 days later, like, you're asking to get part of your gross taken out of your movie and absorbed by the other one. And we have Avengers and Deadpool and Solo all in theaters, all of which people want to see, or even some haven't seen them yet. I like this films being in December. It was nice because it was Star Wars season, and Solo is a pulpy summer film, but it's still like it took a bite out of Deadpool, and Deadpool took a bite out of it, and I'm like, how did we not see this coming?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, after The Last Jedi turned a lot of fans off, having another Star Wars film like less than 6 months later was not really smart. I'm 100% with you. I really enjoyed December kind of being Star Wars month every year.
I think the franchise is at a real crossroads, and I'm not going to paint it as a bad thing. I just mean, like, the first two films went off release-wise and reception-wise relatively without a hitch. They both grossed a lot. Force Awakens set records. Rogue One, for being a movie that had no recognizable characters besides Vader, it's a huge risk. It's an entirely new cast for the most part. Mm-hmm. I'm not counting Saw Gerrera in this case. So it's...
Don't forget Tarkin too.
Oh yeah, well, that was kept out of trailers as well for the most part. So, like, from a marketing standpoint, it was on its own. It was a true standalone, and both did very well. But then, like you said, with Last Jedi, it financially did amazingly, but it debuted a mixed user or fan reception. And Solo's looking, like Kira says, a bit rough around the edges, but good, but still rough, I think we need to decide, obviously Lucasfilm and Disney need to decide what they're going to do with this world, with like Favreau's TV show or the new animated shows, or Rian Johnson's trilogy, the Game of Thrones, Benioff and Weiss's trilogy, the spinoff movies, Boba Fett, Obi-Wan. There's so much on the table right now, and we're at a point where it's like, I don't feel like there's the leadership we need that says like, here's where we're going. It's almost like we're trying here and there to pick little singular successes without choosing a overall direction and tone. If that, do you agree with that? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
curious.
absolutely. I mean, that's other than the current trilogy, like everything in between is just kind of everything else is sort of spiraling out of control. And and they're setting the really difficult task for themselves of trying to have everything fit together so that nothing on Rebels or Clone Wars contradicts what's in the films or the comic books or the novels. And I don't quite know exactly how they're going to figure that out unless they take it, like I said, into a totally different time period and start expanding that.
Well, I think it's safe to say we're both ready for a bit of an evolution of the franchise. Love to hear your thoughts, listeners' thoughts as to what you think of this Boba Fett news, what you think of the solo films, and how you feel Star Wars as a franchise stands currently in the cultural lexicon, and perhaps what you'd like to see going forward. I just want to give a special thanks to Robert for joining me for the discussion today. Thanks again for coming on and having some fun with the news.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm always happy to talk about Star Wars.
Well, go ahead and check out some of Robert's work, which we'll have in the comments section below. And in the meantime, go see Solo, and we'll see you next time.